The Cleveland House of Horrors. The only reason I could do a piece about the crimes of Ariel Castro is by picturing him dangling from a bedsheet in a 9x8 prison cell. I know I'm petty, but that pleases me. I hold grudges, even knowing it causes me suffering, out of principle. Some of us humans are vengeful, and we want to see a guy like that go through 30-plus years of torture, just like he dished out. And if he could have hung there alive for 30 years, that would be ideal. We all know he's not going to reform in there. The girls in Cleveland forgave their captor, which is understandable considering. However, it does let Castro off the hook, doesn't it? But our legal system kind of does the same thing also. Just put him in there for a while. We'd probably have to go to a Sharia law country to get the kind of payback that would satisfy family members of victims. And vengeance isn't always true justice, although it feels right in the moment. But Ariel Castro was just a regular dude. Oh, that's according to the man walking by his house one day when he glimpsed in Castro's kitchen window a tortured woman beating for her life against the glass. Before that day, his neighbors said they never saw anything unusual. I mean, nothing. Dude was a school bus driver back all the way to the early 90s. He barbecued, he played an instrument. When I pictured the girl chained to the radiator, I would have thought, drummer? No, not a drummer. And I'm not trying to be funny, but the mismatch of his outward life and the garden of horrors he tended inside, as if it was his second job to driving the bus, can't be overlooked. Even the girls on his bus had crushes on the man, but that doesn't mean he was normal. If anything, it shows how good he was at creating a surface. But in reality, this malformed weirdo who lived in a residential part of Cleveland, in a close-knit Latino community, stole the innocence of 3 girls in order to satisfy his desires. With one of his captives, he fathered a child, born into a living hell. This is Ariel's Garden of Horrors, this episode's evil nonfiction segment. All right, let's dig into this creep. Ariel Castro was born in 1960 in the sun-soaked island of Puerto Rico. But let's not judge a beautiful island just because it bursts a creep like today's evil subject. Despite being born in paradise, his childhood was far from idyllic. Ariel's parents, Pedro Castro and Lilian Rodriguez, divorced when he was just a child, destabilizing what might have been a normal childhood. I'm not sure if it would have mattered for him, though. Nurture can't always correct nature. Castro's family made their way to the mainland United States, where they first settled in the quiet town of Exton, Pennsylvania. But lucky for Pennsylvania, it was Cleveland, Ohio, where the dark chapters of Castro's life really began to unfold. Cleveland, a city where Castro's estranged father and several other family members had already resided. Even though he was a weird loner, Ariel Castro was far from alone in the early years, being raised with a staggering 9 siblings, both full and half-brothers and sisters. After graduating from Cleveland's Lincoln West High School in 1979, he still had a few years before his story took its most sinister turn, or before his inner evil was allowed to manifest. In the early 1980s, Grimalda Figueroa was the literal girl across the street from the Castros, an unlucky woman who would become the unfortunate love of Ariel's life. Castro and Figueroa lived under the same roof as their parents, the whole lot of them, until 1992 when the couple finally ventured into their own home, a house at 2207 Seymour Avenue, nestled quietly within Cleveland's Tremont neighborhood. On the surface, as a physical structure, the house was just a normal 2-story, 4-bedroom home. Nothing to see here, folks. But before long, according to Grimalda's sister, Alida, all hell started breaking loose soon after the couple moved into their new home. Maybe Ariel felt like he could finally be himself after so many years of parental control and oversight. Alida claims that Castro subjected Figueroa to relentless abuse, a nightmare of violence that left her with a broken nose, shattered ribs, and fractured arms. He even threw her down a flight of stairs, cracking her skull. In 1993, Castro was arrested for domestic violence, but a grand jury chose not to indict him, leaving Grimalda trapped in a house with a monster and her 4 kids. So a nightmare that to all outsiders still looked like the American dream. Conflicts with his wife sent Ariel out prowling. Yes, it was her fault. He made a point of including this in his police interrogation, like the men in charge would understand and have pity on another henpecked husband. But that's what a weak man does under stress. Luckily, women are strong. In October 1996, Figueroa finally found the strength to escape the House of Horrors. She secured custody of their children. Police detained Castro during the move, but they did not press charges, leaving the malevolent Castro free to continue his reign of terror. Alida revealed that Castro's threats and attacks persisted even after she left him. Of course they did. Impotent much? Bravely, in 2005, Figueroa took a chance at getting a little justice, filing charges in Cuyahoga County's Domestic Relations Court. She accused Castro of inflicting multiple severe injuries on her and of frequently abducting their children. Yes, it's still abducting even if they are your kids when you're a psycho. The court granted her a temporary restraining order, but it would prove to be too little, too late. An inoperable brain tumor, almost certainly caused by a blood clot from Castro's brutality, sealed her fate. In 2012, Grimalda Figueroa's life was tragically cut short due to complications from her brain tumor. Friends and relatives gathered to pay their respects to the brave woman who had endured unimaginable suffering. Kind of makes you want to hit something. As I mentioned in the intro, Ariel was, by all accounts, a very accomplished bass player, performing in jam sessions and with several Cleveland salsa bands. His buddies would come to the house for cookouts in the backyard to drink beer on the stoop and listen to records. Friends of his who spent significant amounts of time in the house said the only strange thing about the place was that when you went inside with Ariel, the music would be turned up to ungodly high volumes. That was just how Ariel's house was. The girls upstairs had given up on making noise. One friend said he'd been inside and, at a lull, thought he heard noises coming from inside the walls. Castro claimed he was watching someone's dogs upstairs. They were always playing and knocking boxes over, you know. Well, I don't blame his friend. Why would you even suspect anything from a guy so boring? But he wasn't so boring that night when, once his friends had gone, he could go rectify the day's close call. Before his arrest at the age of 52, Ariel Castro held a certain occupation, and this is creepy knowing what we know now, as a school bus driver for the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Ugh. But even at that job, his behavior was far from ordinary, even for a bus driver. I'm just kidding, bus drivers. I was trying to lighten it up a little. He was known for making illegal U-turns regularly, even with infants and toddlers on his bus, locking the bus down with kids inside so he could go make grocery excursions and indulge in his favorite fast foods, and even leaving the bus unattended so he could take naps at home. His bad judgment led to his termination in November 2012. His house also faced foreclosure after 3 years of unpaid real estate taxes. You'd think he'd want to keep the authorities as far away from his little project as possible, but he was just sloppy. He'd been alone in the house for a long time now, long enough to ponder its emptiness and consider what might make it feel more alive. Michelle Knight was the first to be abducted. She was out anger walking, stomping really, away from the court proceedings in which she had just lost custody of her child, the result of being raped at school. Michelle was developmentally slow and had grown up in an abusive home. Castro leaned out of his car window and asked her if she needed a ride. That was all it took. A predator always looks for the injured sheep, and a good one, like Ariel, was just that. Instead of taking her where she'd wanted to go, the bus driver took her to his house. He told her he wanted to show her some puppies. He got her into a small room and pushed her to the ground. He had found her purse and wallet and pulled out a photo of her child. He asked her who it was, and she answered that it was her son. Grinning, he tore up the photo in her face, telling her she'd never see him again. She looked around for the first time at the room she was in, more a large closet than a room. She had no way of knowing that this would be her only home for the next 10 years. Michelle fought back against her captor's bizarre demands, his tests of control, and as a result was punished often. Women are strong. She was bound tightly with an extension cord and hung from one side of the room to another, hung like a fish in a hammock, she said later. She was left there for 2 weeks without food and not allowed to use the bathroom. Castro often withheld water and food as punishment, forced her to eat spoiled food, put her in freezing cold rooms, and make her take cold showers in the winter. She admitted that she had been pregnant 5 or 6 times, but he would beat her with barbells until she miscarried. She attempted escape multiple times. Then came Gina De Jesus and Amanda Berry, 2 innocent girls plucked off the streets, only a shouting distance away from where they would be caged like animals for 10 long years. They were actually Ariel's kids' classmates, which Ariel mentioned when offering them a ride. This was all it took to get good, innocent girls to trust him. Whether they liked it or not, they were now connected both emotionally and physically, shackled to the ends of the same chain which connected through a hole in the wall separating their rooms, their cells. Could someone like him feel anything for the girls? Sure he did. Castro wrote a letter that was never sent, a journal of sorts, in which he reminisced about the days he took each of the girls and how appalled he was at how stupid the girls had to be for getting into a car with a total stranger. If only they hadn't been so dumb, maybe they wouldn't be where they were now. Again, it's the woman's fault. So that's one thing he felt, disgust. But he also expressed surprising guilt in his letters, even talked about killing himself. But I have a feeling that would have taken a little more grit than he could muster. His was simulated power, the kind you get from exploiting a helpless target. That was the best he could do. And if you thought there was nothing more Ariel Castro could do to reveal his character, he was known to have gone to multiple community vigils for Gina De Jesus, even helping canvass the neighborhood in the early days after her disappearance. Sadly, this is not uncommon for perpetrators who want to make their moment of power last a little longer. Arsonists show up at the scene of their crimes to watch firefighters battle the blaze. Predators go to school board meetings to show their support for parents of their victims. Again, nothing unique about this creep. For a little fun, Castro would test the girls by leaving a door open, going downstairs and hiding quietly just to see what they'd do. Sometimes desperate people make a run for it. Once, Michelle went down the stairs and didn't see him anywhere until he appeared without a sound, but with a big smile on his face as he smashed her head against the floor, so hard she was incapacitated for 3 weeks. She didn't know if she would ever walk again. Amanda and Gina saw the futility of fighting this man. His point was made. He had to refresh this point every once in a while with dire consequences for his captives. When Gina and Amanda disappeared fairly close together, Cleveland news outlets covered them constantly and made a connection, but no one mentioned Michelle Knight anymore. As such, she became the lesser captive. Amanda was soon pregnant with Castro's baby, who he allowed to be born in her cell with the forced help of Michelle in a kiddie pool with no medical supplies or anesthesia. Amazingly, both mother and daughter, named Jocelyn, were okay. Women are, well, you know. Amanda constructed a mock schoolhouse for her daughter, and they would pretend to walk to school each morning for a sense of normalcy within their prison. Her mother was trying to show her what real life was like on the outside. She still had hope that someday this nightmare would end, if not for her, possibly in her daughter's lifetime. When they'd reached the school, her mother would switch to teacher mode. Bless her heart. Amazingly, Castro's neighbors saw him regularly playing happily in his fenced-in yard with Jocelyn. He was sweet with her. It all looked normal. Once the girls were no longer human to him, he said, then it was just like having pets. Right, because all you do with pets is feed them, scream at them, beat the tar out of them, and, oh yeah, have sex with them. That's just like having a pet, right? I can't allow myself to think about what those girls, eventually young women, endured. Fortunately, the human mind is amazingly resilient. It goes into survival mode without you even asking for it. In theory, we all have this ability. Gina reported that through disassociation, she was able to just watch her own abuse from across the room, floating. Then he can do what he wants to me and not hurt me. Not in the moment, anyway. The girls who were held captive at 2207 Seymour Avenue reported that over the years they'd formed bonds with their captor. That's not because they're weak, that's because they're good people, and that's what good people do. Even that he used against them. One day, Michelle was chained in the room with Gina, and they heard Amanda's daughter Jocelyn bouncing freely around the house and playing up and down the stairs, maybe a little more freely than usual. The girls said matter-of-factly, "Daddy is gone." They heard Amanda run downstairs and some banging noises. They knew this sound. The sound of a beating about to happen, most likely to all of them, so the other two hid and waited as quietly as possible. They expected to hear the familiar stomping of a fuming Ariel coming up the stairs, probably dragging Amanda by the hair, but nothing happened. They heard no sound from downstairs, but thought it might be another test, so they remained hidden. Until they heard a woman's voice, a woman they didn't recognize. Someone was shouting, "Police." This was no test. It was the Cleveland police. They were saved. Amanda had somehow gotten the attention of someone, a real person on the outside world. She broke out and was able to make a call to 911.
Cleveland 911.
Hello, please. Help me. I'm Amanda Berry.
You need police, fire, or ambulance.
I need police.
Okay, and what's going on there?
I've been kidnapped and I've been missing for 10 years, and I'm here. I'm free now.
Okay, and what's your address?
2207 Seymour Avenue.
2207 Seymour. Looks like you're calling me from 2210. Looks like you're calling me from 2210.
I can't hear you.
It looks like you were calling me from 2210 Seymour.
Yeah, I'm across the street. I'm using this phone.
Okay, stay there with those neighbors. Talk to the police when they get there.
Okay.
Okay, talk to the police when they get there.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah, talk to the police when they get there.
Okay, all right. I'm going to wait right now.
We're going to send them as soon as we get a car open.
No, I need them now before he gets back.
All right, we're sending them, okay?
Okay, I mean, like,
Who's the guy you're who's the guy who went out?
His name is Ariel Castro.
All right, how old is he?
He's like 52.
All right, and
I'm Amanda Berry. I've been on the news for the last 10 years.
Okay, I got that here. I already. And you said, what was his name again?
Ariel Castro.
And is he white, black, or Hispanic?
He's Hispanic.
And what's he wearing?
I don't know, because he's not here right now. That's
When
why I got away.
he left, what was he wearing?
Sweetheart, it's a pity. What?
Right, the police are on the way. Talk to them when they get there. Okay?
Okay.
I told you they're on the way. Talk to them when they get there, okay?
All right, okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Michelle didn't think it was real. Even as she walked down the path, across the yard, and out onto the sidewalk, she still thought she was chained in her room, dreaming. In a dream, you find a bag of money and you try to bring it back into the waking world. It's a terrible feeling when you wake up and you realize where you are and that the treasure had disintegrated out of your hands and blown away. But eventually, the others were able to convince her, and she fell down and kissed the ground. She had been first, and now she was out. I actually remember this when it was on the news, and there was some morons saying that if the girls were right there all along, right near where they were taken, near where they were from, why didn't they just leave? No outsider can judge these kidnapped, abused girls for not leaving. That's like telling Isaac Newton's gardener, "Hey, stupid, all the numbers are right there. Why don't you just invent calculus?" We need to step outside of ourselves for just a second sometimes. And though their strength to survive was hard to conceive of, I remember concentration camp survivors saying things like, "I just put one foot in front of the other amidst the horror and was lucky enough to still be alive when the time came." They say it like it's the most natural thing in the world, and maybe it is. Just regular people accessing the inherited strength of their Homo sapiens ancestors. Maybe there's more to these hobbits than meets the eye. In an interview on the Mel Robbins talk show years after being freed, the ladies remembered that when Castro punished one girl, the others would sneak her food. And somehow Amanda never gave up hope for Jocelyn having a real life. She found herself at her wit's end one day, picturing her daughter's future, and it gave her the strength to attempt that escape. Even after all of the tests, all the suffering that always came afterward, she pushed aside her programming and just said, "Not today." Extraordinary. Michelle Knight on the same talk show said that God was what got her through, and she forgave Ariel Castro for everything. If this makes things easier on the victim, I say go for it. No armchair atheist can say what they do in a 10-year nightmare, even if it is just self-soothing, and even if forgiveness allows the assailant more leeway than they deserve. We can't judge Michelle Knight, Gina DeJesus, or Amanda Berry. These women are like war heroes coming home from a POW camp. They should never have to work a day in their lives. But unsurprisingly, based on what we know about these women and their characters, they are now active in helping survivors of similar traumas. Similar? There's more? I don't want to think about that. It's rare, yes, but there are more. Around the same time, we learned of J.C. Dugard, Elizabeth Smart, the victims of Josef Fritzl. Humans can be brutal, but I still believe, in general, we're good. Maybe that's just my indoctrination. We just have to learn to take care of each other again. I think we can do it. As for the perpetrator, all we can do is study him, maybe learn from his crimes. You can't prevent it. You can't cure what ails him. Even he admitted this in his letters and later in police interviews, to being sick and needing help and thinking no help would ever arrive. Ariel Castro pled guilty to 937 of the 977 charges against him, including charges of kidnapping, rape, and aggravated murder, as part of a plea bargain which called for consecutive sentences of life in prison plus 1,000 years, all without parole. Under the plea deal, Castro forfeited his right to appeal and could not profit in any way due to his crimes. He also forfeited his assets, including his Seymour Avenue house, which was subsequently demolished. Castro was told by Cuyahoga Judge Michael Russo, "You will not be getting out. Is that clear?" To which Castro responded in a low voice, "I do understand that, Your Honor." He would spend the rest of his life in a prison cell. Ironic. On the evening of September 3rd, 2013, 1 month into his prison sentence, Castro was found hanging from a bedsheet in his detention cell at the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio. He was 53 at the time of his death. 1 month of his sentence. Compare that to his victims who did 10 years plus punishment and are now strong, independent women serving others, thriving. Huge props to them and wishes of continued prosperity. I don't know how you did it, but you did. Strange Sally Diamond. Sally was born in captivity as her mother, Denise Norton, was being held in a dungeon in Ireland. Chained to the wall and barely kept alive by a psycho named Conor Geary. That name would strike fear into anyone with a pulse in Ireland for decades after his crimes had been discovered. Denise had been kidnapped and brought to her cell when she was just 11 years old and was only valued for sex and power. Geary, a dentist, would deal out punishments for small infractions, including removing the captive's teeth without anesthesia, causing her to look old for her age. Geary's attraction to Denise lessened as she developed from kid to adult. But in her early teens, she became pregnant by her captor and was allowed to give birth to a boy. He called him Peter Geary. Several years later, another baby, a girl, Mary Norton, was born in Denise's cell, Connor's other child. Connor gave the boy his name because boys are worth something. Girls were a stain and they deserved to be punished. He stressed lessons like this to a growing Peter, who was locked away in his own cell next door to his mother's. But the boy never even knew his own mother was there, having been told that the noises he heard from next door were a ghost. Despite his imprisonment, Peter was given more comforts than his mother, like books to read and occasionally some television. On one occasion, his dad had to leave town for a long weekend and chose to inform Peter then that the ghost was really his worthless, pregnant mother, and he would share the cell with Denise while he was away. but that he should keep her in line. His mother had begged to see her son for years, but he had been taken away from her cell as soon as the boy no longer needed to be breastfed. Peter's dad encouraged him while he was away to kick her in the face and stomach if she annoyed him, so he did. His father also told Peter that he had a condition that prevented him from ever touching another person not related by blood, and if he did so, he would turn to stone and die a horrible, painful death. As a result, Peter always neurotically kept his distance from other people due to an intense fear of someone accidentally killing him. They wouldn't mean to do it, but it would happen just the same. It was one of Connor Geary's many successful methods of control. Worked like a charm. I'm your dad, and I'll always keep you safe. Another time when his dad was in town, a burglar entered the Geary property, and the captive woman yelled out that she was Denise Norton, and she was being held captive. She had gone missing years ago. Peter knew the burglar had heard this. The robber legged it, clearly running to go get help. Their discovery imminent, Connor Geary takes his son and flees from Ireland, eventually winding up in New Zealand with fake passports and new identities. Peter is now Stephen Armstrong. His father would be James Armstrong. Back in Ireland, Denise Norton and her 7-year-old daughter are found in Geary's dungeon and begin the long road of treatment for their trauma. Denise is unable to be separated from her daughter Mary for even a second without going feral. When her psychiatrist attempts to do a trial separation, the woman beats her head against the wall until she dies. I think back on moments like these when considering what kind of justice is appropriate for the Connor Gearys, the Ariel Castros of the world. Her daughter Mary, also in terrible condition but not beyond help, is adopted by her psychiatrist and his wife and given the name Sally Diamond. I will use this name from here onward out of respect for her. She grows up with no memory of her first 7 years, thankfully, I guess. I know it's not possible right now, but it would be amazing to create a technology like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, by which someone could blank out whole sections of their life but keep the rest. My vindictive nature resists this, though, for the same reasons I find forgiveness on some level morally wrong, but often necessary for a victim to move on with a productive life. If you could delete those traumas from your hard drive, it would mean a better life for you, but based on a lie. But if it is true that there's no adequate punishment for crimes like these, there's no undoing the harm, and fair compensation is a laugh, then I do see the appeal of forgiveness or deletion, if you will. Because if you don't, then you allow the creep the power to torment you independent of his actions or intentions. If your victimizer dies in jail, let's say, but you are still suffering, is it right to punish yourself on behalf of someone who isn't even here anymore? Sally is raised in a loving but overprotective home and displays characteristics of autism spectrum disorder, which limits her ability to engage socially beyond her parents and shop clerks. It's amazing she can do anything after what that monster Geary did to her and to her mom. All things considered, she's come out all right. Her adoptive mother passed away long before the novel introduces us to the adult Sally. And when her adoptive dad dies, she does what he has always said. When I go, just put me out with the bins. Being as they always incinerate their trash in the shed out back, she does the same with his body. She attempts home cremation in order to put him out with the bins. In town, when a clerk prepares her father's pension check, she informs them she wouldn't be needing Dad's pension anymore, because he had died. The surprised clerk says, "Oh no, she hadn't heard of his passing." Sally says, "No, of course not, it just happened." The lady solemnly asked when the funeral would be held, and Sally informed her that there would be no funeral. Dad wanted to be put out with the bins, so that's where he was. People in town who know the basic scenario are shocked, but not surprised. Oh, strange Sally Diamond. Her father had left a series of letters for Sally to read after his death. See, she didn't know he meant for her to open them as soon as he died. And so she thought she'd wait for her birthday to open them as sort of a surprise. Oh, Sally. Inside the first letter, her dad indicates the doctor who she should call in the event that he dies, a funeral home with whom to plan the service, and instructions on who to tell. Sally realizes that she may have made a mistake taking things too literally again. and contacts the doctor and some family friends who help her navigate the whole ordeal of planning a funeral after partially burning the body. Surprisingly, Sally inherits a large estate from her parents, who knew she would be needing help when it came time for her to become independent. They lived frugally to give her a better future. Reading her father's letters in order, as instructed by her late dad, Sally learned for the first time that her father was a man called Connor Geary, a brutal kidnapper, rapist, sadist, well known by the Irish populace, who was still on the loose. Her birth mother had died less than a year after they were discovered in Geary's dungeon. Sally's an unreliable narrator to the extent that neurodivergence colors what might be a more faithful telling of an already bizarre narrative. This is never overused, and it doesn't even feel like a device, really. It allows us to see through her eyes just enough. When the news breaks to the international press that Sally Diamond, one of the survivors of Geary, has burned her dad's dead body, she is harassed by the media, by true crime podcasters, the whole lot. Sally deals with this as best she can, with the help of her therapist, her aunt, and her few friends in town. Then in the mail she receives a teddy bear with a note to Mary Norton. "I thought you'd like to have him back." She recognizes the bear as Toby, a toy from her blocked-out childhood. A friend tells her not to touch the package sent from New Zealand and signed S, as it could be evidence of Connor Geary's location. The letter is scrutinized by local police, who agree it could be from her birth father. No one knows about Peter. Peter Geary, who now goes by the name Stephen Armstrong, I'm not using it, by the way, is an unreliable narrator for different reasons, and begins to tell his story in parallel. The authorities in Ireland had searched everywhere for an Irish man in connection to the kidnapping and imprisonments of Denise and subsequently her daughter. They searched for any sudden dentists popping up anywhere in the Commonwealth. A New Zealand man, a citizen with a son, quickly removed Connor Geary, now James Armstrong, from the list of potential candidates. In New Zealand, his father has been working as a dentist and maintaining a home where he and Peter live comfortably. After years of isolation, much of it self-imposed due to his deadly condition, Peter actually makes friends with a biracial Maori boy next door, his name Ranyi. He can relate to Peter a little in terms of being socially sidelined. Ranyi doesn't want to join the local Maori gangs, but the white kids don't want him either, so he's alone. In secret from his father, Peter occasionally lets Ranyi watch television in their house and takes his new friends swimming at the nearby lake. Ranyi can't swim, but he sure can drink beer, which Peter declines. So he stays near the shore at first, but soon swims out toward Peter, feeling brave. When Ranyi begins struggling, Peter panics, knowing he cannot touch the boy to help him. He watches helpless as his first and only friend drowns in front of him. He speeds home and explains the situation to his dad, who implies it was not so bad getting rid of another half-breed. The next day, Ranyi's aunt comes asking if they'd seen her missing boy, but Connor deflects any blame from Peter. He tells her that his son never liked her nephew and that they were certainly not friends. The racist cops chalk up the disappearance to gang activity and brush the case aside. When the boy's body is found at the lake, the news barely mentions it. Connor Geary promises that he will find his son a new friend. Peter's dad would often leave the house at odd times and return home with scratches and bruises. Of course he would. He outfits the barn behind the house with soundproofing and unbreakable locks, and before long, he kidnaps a local 11-year-old girl, Lindy, from near the lake. Her family was on the other side picnicking, and Connor offered her a ride. A confused and impotent Peter watches it all happen from the passenger seat, as if from a great distance. Was this the new friend he'd promised his son? At the new dungeon, the monstrous cycle continues. Peter helps tend to the new captive and tries to make it as easy as possible for her. It takes a long time before Lindy is tamed, but after many escape attempts leading to better security, she eventually accepts her fate. I wouldn't disrespect real victims of this level of trauma by pretending I understand what they've been through. And as an outsider, the only power I have is to try and seek justice for the victims against the perpetrator. And yes, I am aware that this might not be the most enlightened way to look at crime and punishment. As they become closer, Lindy convinces Peter that his so-called life-threatening medical condition might be fabricated by his dad. The thought had never even entered his brain, but that had been thoroughly washed since birth. His indoctrinated viewpoints have a certain Connor Geary tilt to them. Peter does some digging and finds that his disease, the handicap that has kept him from every normal childhood activity, never existed. As impossible as it seems, he begins to question his dad's honesty over the years. Might Lindy's seemingly absurd claims of physical and sexual abuse be true? Might he not be the saint Peter knew and trusted all these years? But rape seems immoral. Dad? He tries to square the circle. As Lindy begins to develop physically, and Peter has already discovered he is probably not at risk of dying, he risks touching another human being. He and Lindy become physical. Peter's finally free of his shackles. Lindy soon gets pregnant by him, something Connor could never do. She gives birth in the barn to a baby girl. Peter takes the baby, his daughter, away and leaves her on a church doorstep. Lindy, crying inconsolably, chained to the Geary barn, never forgives Peter for this. One day, Peter is driving his dad to work and accidentally crashes the car. Dad is trapped inside as Peter drags himself into a ditch. As Connor hangs in the overturned car, dripping with fuel, Peter realizes he could save him. Instead, he leaves the monster to die in the burning wreck. He just walks away from the fire. A touch of justice? Now it's just him and Lindy. She is euphoric to learn that she is free of her abuser, and Peter knows the truth about his father's crimes now. Things seem to have turned a corner. Of course, he'd like to let Lindy go, but he can't risk her exposing him to the police and potentially leading to his capture for his involvement in Connor Geary's crimes. He doesn't want to risk it. You understand. Peter continues her imprisonment in the barn for decades. He rules her life, tending to her caringly, just as before, keeping her safe, much more comfortable than his dad would have. And that was something to be proud of. Lindy comes down with appendicitis, and Peter knows he has to help his precious friend, so he drives her in the direction of the hospital. Unfortunately, she dies on the way there. He disposes of her body at the same lake from which she'd been taken decades earlier. Amazingly, Lindy has not been forgotten, and the body of this near middle-aged woman is tested for DNA and found not only to be the very same girl who had gone missing a generation ago from the same location, but unexpectedly also the biological mother of a baby girl left on a doorstep nearby many years ago, while the father's genetic profile is not registered. The noose seems to be tightening on Peter Geary. An investigative true crime podcast submits that the James Armstrong who had died in a car crash with his son years ago was really Connor Geary, the Irish fugitive. They had proposed a timeline that placed Connor Geary, and therefore his son, near the area where Lindy had disappeared as a kid, then later giving birth to a girl to one of them, and then her body appearing in the same location long after Connor Geary had died. What happened in those intervening years? Was she kept captive? Well, that sounds sort of Connor Geary. The DNA website could only provide the initials PG to identify the father, but the podcaster's investigation proposed that Connor Geary, CG, was James Armstrong, and that he had died in a New Zealand road accident, leaving his son Stephen Armstrong, PG, to carry on without him. PG must have impregnated Lindy, who had been missing but apparently kept alive for decades after CG's death, somewhere near their small New Zealand hamlet. Podcasters. Peter sees Irish media reports on TV about some Sally Diamond and her disposal of her adoptive father's body. He assumed, wrongly, that she would appreciate the comfort a teddy bear would bring, but not just any teddy. The one he'd stolen from her room as a kid in the dungeon back in Ireland, before her discovery and just before his escape with the monster dentist. It never occurred to him that she might find it threatening. Just as he was so careful to ease Lindy's suffering all those years behind Connor Geary's back, and then provide her with a very comfortable existence during his own reign, he was legit trying to help Sally, as he'd been raised. Will Peter be tracked down and exposed? Will he face justice for his part in the crimes of the demon dentist, now an Irish urban legend? I don't want to spoil the end of the book. You should read it, or listen to it like I did. We seem to be born with certain behavioral makeups, and then molded by circumstances. Having a father like Connor Geary, spending your formative years taking moral direction from a psycho, might not change your genetic predisposition, but clearly it exposes you to a lot of troublesome influences. Peter explains in Strange Sally Diamond, no one is all evil or good, referring to his dad as loving and protective of his loved ones, aiming to avoid unnecessary harm. In retrospect, he thinks his dad probably shouldn't have held anyone hostage to begin with, but he was doing the best he could with the situation he was in, right? Is Connor Geary Ariel Castro? The connections are blinking in neon, but of course it's more complicated than that. Although they're unusual, the kind of men who commit these crimes are sadly quite predictable in their needs and in their vile methods they choose to satisfy them. Their warped vision sees a road ahead of them leading to free, non-consensual sex, including with kids, whenever they want it. Whatever they have to do to scratch that itch, that's unfortunate collateral damage. Castro and Geary knew they were sick, and they rationalized the shit out of it. So they set up their dungeons, both inner and outer, rigged up their physical and mental restraints, and get on with their evil. I won't dwell on the topic, what they actually did. The only interesting aspect of their schemes to me is their ability to continue living life out in the open without skipping a beat, interacting with normal people who never notice a thing. Does that mean that any oddball on the street might be... ugh? What about your neighbor? Could Mr. Rogers have a dungeon? I don't want to think like that because I choose to believe that these people are rare enough not to worry about. It's a good thing our species is so good at denial. When we learn something hideous about someone, an abuser, kidnapper like Ariel Castro, like the fictional Connor Geary, well, now they're radioactive. They're forever tainted. You can't unring that bell, and this self-defense measure from our animal past makes perfect sense long ago. You label someone as being different, as having a dangerous communicable disease, and then not just shun them, but cut them off completely. The risk of infection supersedes our liberal decency. If someone tells me Joe on the corner is a registered sex offender, I put them in a box that protects my kids. Fatherly instinct overpowers my belief in someone's right to reform themselves. If I find out later that it was actually Joe's brother Jason who was the predator, I'd still never ask Joe to babysit my kid. I couldn't get the stink off of him. Even if now I know it's not true. It's not logical, but I do it. Maybe it's my Neanderthal ancestry. I'm like 98th percentile Neanderthal. But I like justice. Evil people like Castro, like Connor Geary, once they're in their boxes, they can starve and die for all we care because we've essentially amputated them from any compassion we might have offered them. After he'd been convicted and sentenced to death, John Wayne Gacy's execution drew excited crowds who cheered as the lights dimmed when the electric chair did its job. Good people, just people. I realize not everyone is as spiteful as this, but for those of us who are unforgiving of evil, we can flip a switch like that and now we simply don't care. It's the same switch that allows soldiers to fire on kids just like them, but holding a different colored flag. Shouldn't flipping this switch be reserved for such occasions? Well, it's not. It's in all of us. There are probably deeper philosophical implications to this switch, but this isn't that kind of program. I'm not saying that the killer pedophile clowns of this world deserve our pity exactly, but where is the liberal spirit of compassion? Where's the Judeo-Christian charity? Ariel Castro had to be sick in the head to be helpless against his attraction to kids to the point he was willing to touch them, right? Most of us think that people like him deserve their kind of comeuppance, but they didn't choose to be what the young'uns now call a minor attracted person, MAP. If describing pedophilia as simply a form of attraction seems a little too progressive, even to us liberals, buckle up. According to mental health experts, being a MAP is really no different than being straight or same-sex attracted. at least in the scientific sense. I can actually buy that. And there's nothing wrong with being attracted to one sex or the other, or none. We want what we want. It's no one's fault. You can't force someone to change their sexuality, their attraction, and even if the technology did exist, it seems self-evident that you shouldn't. This is a blurb from Wikipedia, an article under Virtuous Pedophiles. Virtual Pedophiles is an internet-based mutual support group and public awareness group for people with various chronophilias who acknowledge having a primary or partial romantic and/or sexual attraction to minors, but want to lead normal, productive lives without having to engage in sexual acts with them. The main goal of this group is to help the public become more aware of the existence of virtuous people with attractions like theirs. The two founders of the group use pseudonyms to avoid revealing their true identity for their safety. So yeah, it's wrong to change someone's root nature. I feel the pull of that argument. But what if, I don't know, it was a man who had built a jail in his house and imprisoned young girls to commit heinous acts on them for decades just to satisfy his own sexual thrill? I feel that radioactive thing happening again. What if these people really can't stop their natural desires because they can't? This is so clearly understood that men have been and are still castrated chemically these days in modern countries to prevent reoffending. I bet as Western culture progresses, fingers crossed that it does, people will look back on chemical castration, definitely, and maybe even imprisonment as barbaric, despite the offense committed. I hope it's clear that no one's sexuality should be punished. That would be immoral, illegal, all kinds of wrong. Evil people are a whole other ball of wax. There are still countries where homosexuality is considered an offense and gay people are thrown from rooftops. Today, it's beyond brutal, but maybe we will look like that to future generations when our inner Neanderthal considers people like Ariel Castro and Connor Geary and says, just walk away from the wreck. Let them burn.
Don't be scared. Subscribe to Season 1 for free in your podcast app. Then, be scared.